All right, we are here with the one and only Graham Rodford here from Archax. Graham, how are you today?
I'm amazing. Cheers for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, you know what? You are amazing because I know you don't feel your best right now, but you show up, and I really appreciate that, man. And that just speaks to you and how hard a working guy you are. So tell us a little bit about Archax and what you guys do.
Yeah, sure. So we set up in 2018. So we had this vision, I guess, which seems less crazy now, but back then everyone thought it was slightly crazy. Every single asset moving on chain. So, not just everything in financial services. I think every asset in the world belongs on chain, but obviously our focus is in financial services. So I think everything that we're used to trading, whether it's equities, debt, warrants, certificates, whatever your instrument is moving on chain, and so is every piece of the financial infrastructure that it trades on.
Well, you're talking about something that is really in front of the entire industry now, and that is changing everything from the vulnerable, antiquated payment system that has been stacked up decade after decade after decade from the 60s to where we are today. And there is a giant paradigm shift that's taking place to blockchain and distributed ledger technology. And it is the market infrastructure that's being built for more than a decade now so that it can be supported wholesale on the back end for that infrastructure. And you made a point earlier off camera that I thought was super great. And I want you to talk about this that, it will not be one, asset or one protocol to rule them all. This is going to be a multi chain world. And could you talk about that and who you're working with?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a big world. We estimate, there's a lot of estimates out there, but every financial asset that exists today is over 1 quadrillion, a multiple of the 3 trillion that exist in standard crypto, if you like. And that's the existing financial assets. That doesn't count all of the new assets that are coming along. So whether it be NFTs or metaverse mortgages or in-game assets, whatever it might be, the future financial market is much bigger. The chances of there being one chain that everyone uses for everything is pretty remote. You already see some of the chains start to focus on gaming, some of them's focusing on bonds, some of them are private, some of them are public, whatever it might be. Everyone's going to start developing their niche, and then people are working on bridges to kind of bind them together. So we don't think it's going to be a one chain world, but we do work with several. We tend to be commercially led. We got friends, Ethereum, Polygon, Algorand, Hedera, Ripple, Solana, Tezos, Nia. All of these guys are talking to us about a variety of projects. And I guess you see the kind of, Ethereum kind of original, lots of people building decentralized applications, questions about scalability and cost, which are kind of being solved by layer twos and the like. Then you've got the likes of Ripple that have really, cemented themselves in payments, and they're starting to expand a bit into the tokenization world as well. And then companies like Hedera, who've got this kind of low cost model, really decent carbon footprint backed by a load of institutions. So you've got this kind of range out there, and all of those chains have different functionalities built into them natively or not. Anyway, so you've got a range of services available. So I think in over time, what you'll see is assets that require certain functionality or certain communities will move in one direction or the other.
Well, it's such a great understanding for the audience to know that, and I've said this too. Uh, our audience, we're not XRP maxis, even though we cover that centrically here on the channel. We're utility maxis, and if your project has utility, like the projects that you mentioned, we're super excited about them. But I do have a question. Ethereum recently has been targeted now by a state agency or a agency, and it may be the SEC apparently, right? And they may be coming after Ethereum now, but not based on the ICO like we've all heard about and talked about. But it may be based on the fact that Ethereum is switching and has switched from proof of work to proof of stake. Could you talk about what that implication may mean for you and Archax if that is something that comes to fruition? What would happen in that regard?
Yeah, there's like a few points there. Good question. So Archax in the UK, we are fully registered for cryptocurrencies and we're fully regulated for security. So,
Okay.
high level, Ethereum's in this bucket or this bucket. Either way, Archax can handle it. So that's kind of not an issue for us directly. But obviously, there's far-reaching implications for people and all of the exchanges it trades on if it potentially were a security. Now, I'm no expert. In the UK, the definition of a security is pretty clear, and pretty much every regulated financial instrument. Whereas in the US, obviously, there's the Howey test, and it's much more complicated. But my understanding is that that certain commodities derivatives have been built around Ethereum, and if that were to happen, it would suggest that it couldn't have been a security. So I think there's a lot of arguments for why it is, why it isn't, that have been going around for a long time. Look, for me, and this isn't a legal or regulatory opinion, a security in the UK, there's a list of them: equity, debt, certificates, warrants. They have certain characteristics. I mean, Ethereum is different. I don't think the way that it's held or the payoff is the same as what I would call a security, at least. So my own personal opinion is, it's a bit of a stretch that it is, and I think there are some technical reasons in the US why actually the way it's been treated suggests that it wouldn't. So, it can have far-reaching implications. I think most of what I've seen in terms of securities, the ones that have been sold, there's been a fine, it's been paid, people move on. I don't think it's going to be a showstopper by any stretch.
Well, and thank you for that. I do appreciate that. And one, to clarify for the audience, I certainly believe that cryptos themselves, the assets themselves, are not securities. It's how they're packaged, right? So that's, for me, that's just where I'm coming from here in the U.S. here, just for clarity for the audience. Now, tell us a little bit about exactly what Archax is doing. So just lay that out, like your vision there, and then we'll build out the next part of this conversation from that.
Yeah, sure. So I guess we started kind of, if you imagine summer 17, loads of ICOs happening. And we'd already been looking at crypto for some while. And back in summer 17, you're seeing all these ICOs and you're hearing all this stuff about this looks like a security. And I kind of, with the team, start thinking, okay, what if it is a security? Well, why does it matter? What does it matter? And then the conclusion you come to, okay, well, probably some of these are. And over time, we started to think this technology is going to replace everything. It's so powerful. There's so many efficiency gains there that it means that some will be securities, and you need to have regulated parties that are capable of holding securities and that can face off against all these big institutions. So, kind of whole idea about Archax is if you want to do something in crypto as an institution, then we're the credible partner to go to. So, what we've been doing over the last 6 years is really expanding that regulatory footprint whilst building out all of our own technology. So, we've got a full tokenization engine on most of those chains that I mentioned earlier. We can raise money for companies. We're a fully regulated custodian and a qualified custodian in the US. We have a full secondary market for crypto and for securities. So you really can come to us and pretty much do everything. And we're the only company I know in the world that's actually building a digital central securities depository as well. So like DTC and Euroclear, we have a company called Montis. It's applied in Luxembourg, and hopefully we're getting pretty close to having that license as well. So the kind of the challenge for Artex from the start has been, okay, moving the financial services market and everything is going to be pretty difficult. Actually, what's a lot faster is if you build all the bits yourself, so you're totally self-reliant. That's kind of where we are.
Well, that's an amazing breakdown right there, and super exciting what you're doing. And that you want to be this all in one, build it yourself so you're not having to rely on these outside entities. But you touch on something that macro wise, I want the audience to understand too, which is crypto. The market of cryptocurrency is a very, very small market. It's what everybody thinks about today. But the larger market is the traditional markets that you're highlighting and the ability to tokenize those markets. And that's exactly what you're building for. And that's an amazing idea and understanding of what Archax is doing and building themselves to provide. But let's talk about this, because in order to get all of this value moved around, it has to be tokenized. And then in a lot of cases, we need to see central bank digital currencies and stable coins in a regulated framework, right, around the globe to interact and move all of this value. How far away do you feel like that is for us, Graham?
Uh, Good question. So I guess, that one of the appeals of why digital is taking over everything for me is that if you think about the current world, you've got assets on one type of technology, and then you've got fiat on another type of technology, and it's hard for them to talk. Like you can automate bank feeds, sure, but what you really want is a contract that sits there and says, if I receive security and if I receive cash from that side, then I deliver. And so having digital cash is useful. And obviously, the likes of Tether and Circle have done well at getting their stablecoins out there. So we can kind of see that it works, that automation works. And some of the e-money rules across Europe and the money transmission rules across the US and all payments regulation globally, they kind of have dealt with this a little bit anyway. But I think what's been missing somewhat is the kind of control framework around that. How much do we trust these stablecoins? So what central bank digital currencies in theory offer you is trust, the trust that this is actually backed by something, by a central government. Now, what I've seen from most central bank digital currencies is that they don't want to be able to distribute to everyone. They just want to be able to distribute them to commercial banks, and then the commercial banks in turn are going to have to distribute their own currencies backed by the central bank digital currency. So like, we're probably a long way away from this kind of globally transferable currency. However, I would say alongside that, and what people don't talk enough about is, I'm not like a deep economist, but what I mean when I say what is cash is how I think about it is if I want to go and buy a Bitcoin or Vodafone, I have to pay with cash or a stable coin. But, we've tokenized the Aberdeen Money Market Fund recently. It trades at a value of one. Now, let's assume that everyone accepts that as eligible collateral. Well, I can go and buy Bitcoin with the tokenized money market fund or Vodafone as well. Do I really care about the central bank digital currency? As long as both parties are accepting there's pretty good collateral after this as a value of one and we know it's held by a regulated entity, maybe we don't need those cash legs at all. So one of the advantages of having this regulated and unregulated on our platform is that we can start playing with stuff like this. So we are going to launch a market where you can buy Bitcoin with tokenized money market funds. We are enabling people to be able to transfer collateral as tokenized money market funds. We think the uses of cash are going to be slightly different in the future. One of the examples I always give, if it's interesting, is that in the old fund that I used to work at, if you imagine at the end of the day you've got a large cash balance, you can choose to leave your cash balance at the bank, and maybe you're taking some bank risk, or you can sweep it into a money market fund or equivalent. But then when it's in the fund, you can't really spend it or use it, so you're kind of giving up usability, in exchange for a reduced perceived risk. But actually, if you can put it in the money market fund and still spend it, use it, transfer it the same, then you've kind of got rid of a lot of that bank cash risk, and instead you've got asset risk, which is usually held in more of an insolvency remote vehicle. So arguably, you can get a lot of the transferability and usability of cash, but just using it with assets instead.
Well, when you start talking about, being able to trade and settle transactions that aren't fiat to something like a regular purchase in our day and age now, you really start talking about the power of this technology and how it can make markets in a way that is not possible today. And that is super, super exciting because this will contribute, I believe, to the way you described it, to the velocity of money moving hands around the world. And it's a very important time that we see the velocity of money come up quickly because there's been so much of it printed around the world. But being able to make these transactions from using a money market fund or selling my Apple stock to go buy this instead, these things are things that are not quite there today. What will you be using? Are you going to use something like a decentralized ledger of XRP ledger, the decentralized exchange? What do you use to make those new market trades and settlements?
So on our tokenization engine, we can tokenize on several chains already. So tokenized money market funds we actually already have on Hedera and Ethereum, and actually we've just released a functionality for XRPL as well. So we're going to have it all available on those chains.
Wonderful.
When someone comes to trade on Archax, currently we have a centralized exchange. Which is the reason for that is not because we're not pro BLT. The reason for that is just that usually when you're building a central limit order book, chains can't keep up with the speed. You need to be able to cancel orders. You don't want to pay fees unnecessarily. Nonetheless, we've also got a kind of decentralized exchange that we've just built, but we're not yet using, so that people can put liquidity pools together and be able to trade pairs as well. And I guess the way that we're thinking about, the beautiful thing about crypto is because of the absence of regulation, it's been more easier to develop liquidity because you've got a bunch of market makers. You can give them inventory, give them some cash, incentivize them with tokens, and away they go. And they can use the communities that have been developed to start to develop some liquidity. When you get into the securities world, you can't give them tokens at a pre-sale price and say, hey, go make me markets on these 27 exchanges. Every exchange needs to be regulated. Every market maker needs to be regulated. Usually needs to be connected into CSDs, clearing houses, whatever. So very different to kind of have that liquidity. However, you can usually create some sort of secondary market that's appropriate. So it might not always be a central limit order book, which is like the exchanges most of us think about. It might be a bulletin board, peer-to-peer trading, or some sort of auction, or some sort of RFQ process. But there'll be a place where all of these securities can trade.
Oh, that is so wonderful. And I can't wait. I feel like we're closer now than ever, even though I know here in the United States, we're still a laggard as far as waiting for regulations and legislative clarity. But I do remind the audience that 90% of transactions done digitally in the world are done using a digital dollar of some sort. So if we get that clarity, we are the leader in this space when it comes to transactions, right? But we need that official clarity and I think prudential regulation to ensure that the surplus and the backing of any digital asset, should be there if it's going to be used as a stable coin. Now, looking forward, you talk about these repositories, the DTCC and other settling companies. There's a lot of money in these places, and there is a lot of tokenization that needs to happen there. What does this market look like in size? Now, I know recently, not long ago, you were at Swell in Dubai for Ripple, and you made some comments that went wildfire across crypto Twitter, and certainly in the Ripple XRP space. Now, they were exciting because of the size of volume. Please let everybody know what you were thinking and saying. And again, it doesn't mean you're like talking about just one ledger. You were talking about multiple ledgers. Everybody, certainly in our audience here, understands it's going to be a multi-ledger world after all. But what gets you so excited about the amount of volume? Tell people about the volume you see coming and what it is that makes you so bullish on that volume coming.
Yeah, if I might give a bit of a, backstory to all of this is,
Sure.
and I was part of this as well. For the last 6 years of building Archax, what's happening now, we've kind of said from the start. And the first few years were spent with everyone saying, okay, there's no STOs. Where are the STOs? And everyone's looking for these new assets to be created. And we're partly guilty of this as well, looking at the STOs being created, going and assessing them and going, okay, when's a good product's going to come? And then it kind of like at some point slaps you in the face that like most people that want a security have already created the security. This is just the technology. This is just the technology upon which all current and future securities are going to be based. So once you realize that, you realize, okay, it's not that STOs won't be liquid, it's that STOs are just securities and they already exist on old technology. Now, kind of take that thought forwards and go, okay, well, when are they going to reach mainstream and critical mass? Well, if you look into DTC, Euroclear, I don't know what the numbers is, but there's trillions of assets. And let's say there's 100 trillion in one of them for argument's sake. Now, let's say Euroclear has 100 trillion. I don't know what the number is. Let's say it has 100 trillion of assets right there on its old database. But at the moment, let's imagine in parallel, it's been running an Ethereum node and decides to switch it all over tomorrow night. Overnight, every single one of those assets is now on chain. Every single one of those assets is now an STO, a digital RWA, whatever you want to call it. So it's not that I'm saying, 30 to 50 trillion or whatever I said is suddenly going to appear out of people tokenizing hotel resorts and watches and things that had never been tokenized before. I'm saying those assets that exist right now are all moving on chain. I mean, there was an announcement yesterday, Securitize, great move, working with BlackRock, working on a digital fund. Looks like that's going to have 50 to 100 million in it, $5 million tickets. Like that's one product that's existing today. On our side, we've tokenized the Aberdeen Money Market Fund. We've got a few other investment managers we're going to be announcing shortly. We've got about 300 to 400 million of pipeline coming into our platform. So that's nearly $500 million into Archax already from a new type of market we have created. And we speak to every bank out there in some form or another. Banks I'd never even heard of, frankly, before I started Archax, were speaking to us about how do we tokenize things in the future? How do we tokenize our deposits? How can we use one of these as collateral? How do we pay on-chain interest? Everyone's thinking about how this is going to happen. So, the US, I would agree, has seemingly been a bit behind or a bit confused, let's say, on the regulation. But fair play to BlackRock and everyone else flying the ETF flags. Once those Bitcoin ETFs came into place, that pretty much said forever this asset class is in place. And once you start realizing that, maybe Bitcoin's a different use case, but when you start looking at Ethereum and all of the other chains that people are building on, once those ETFs appear, you realize that people were saying that this is the infrastructure of the future. So everyone's already building on this stuff. Everyone knows that they are. The only thing I might be wrong on is the timing, but absolutely, I'm convinced every single financial asset is moving on chain.
Well, you bring up such a fantastic point. When you think about it's more than a decade, most of these protocols that you're mentioning, whether it's Ethereum or XRP or HBAR or these other protocols, Stellar, tokenizing treasuries to a large degree already, this early into the game. When I think about that, that is like, I'm a macro investor in this space. So when I'm thinking about these things, I'm looking at like where the trend is going. And I think, it's more than a decade that these companies have been working and building the market infrastructure to tokenize all of this. And as you said, and I would certainly imagine that there's plenty of simulation data that's done by these companies and protocols and banks and financial institutions to ensure that they're running side by side, just like Swift is running a coexisting phase today with ISO 20022 running in a coexisting phase with the old payment rails. Is that something that you see quite a bit in this space back end?
Yeah, I don't think anyone really wants to run parallel systems, but the
Right,
reality is you need to take everyone on a journey. Like Artax didn't want to build the whole ecosystem.
right.
We've just done it to because it speeds things up on our side rather than waiting for the institutions. If you speak to those banks, especially the guys running the kind of the blockchain innovation desk, they all want this to happen as well. However, they go back into their desk and they speak to their ops team and they're like, look, we need to receive a whatever MT XXX notification for every transaction. So you kind of got this world where the two need to talk together. I think of it like parallel running of any new system. So that's fine. So I think if you kind of fly out of the gates with, hey, we've got this great tech solution of how clearing and CSDs work in the future. That's great, and you might make a good business and have some good innovation, but you'll probably have more success if you just take a little moment to see if you can make that interoperate with the existing system and help to take some of the current players on a journey. And that's what we've been trying to do throughout our history is say, look, we appreciate all the guys innovating in DeFi, and that's really cool. But if we rock up at the FCA's door and say, hey, you know what? We've got a liquidity pool churning out 24% yield where everyone can contribute any pair they want. They're just going to say, how does that all work? Whereas if you kind of go at it gradually, saying, okay, this is what we're doing, and this is the regulation it's in line with, and it's currently permissioned, and over time we're going to do this. Everyone's a bit more willing to go on that journey with you. So hopefully you end up with something a bit more scalable with over time, more of the large traditional players coming with you.
Oh, that's a great point. Graham Rodford. Hey, final thought this thing for us, Graham. I could talk to you all day, but I know you got things to do. And I don't want to keep you from your family and the work you got to do. But I love speaking with you. But tell us, in a final thought here, what does this space look like? What does ArchX look like to you? What do you perceive like, the ripples, the XRPs, the H bars, right? Encompassing the multi chain world. What does this look like to you in 2025? How big does this market look to you?
Oh, 2025. I mean, 2025 is quite soon, In,
It
in
is.
my original business plan, I probably had all the world on chain by now. But, 2025, look, I think assets are going to develop more utility. And I like the idea that companies can raise money from anyone and anyone can invest in anything. That's kind of
Yeah.
that's a little bit of I don't like democratization, but I like this idea that making everything more accessible. And I think when you've got a world where people can use any item as collateral and borrow against it, you make things potentially more affordable. If I'm like an investor sitting there on my, I don't know, $10,000 of Vodafone stock, and I need to, make my mortgage payment this month, wouldn't it be great if I could just go to an online platform like Aave or Compound and borrow against my Vodafone shares without having to sell them just to make my mortgage payment? And if I can't repay it, then I get closed out and it's all good. I'm no worse off. But I've actually got that option there. Whereas at the moment, what do I do? If I want to get out of my Vodafone position, well, I go onto my broker. I probably, end up paying a £25 fee and paying a spread, even though everyone tells me that it's a zero fees place. I then get stung for capital gains tax. I've then got to pay stamp duty on when I get back into the position and pay another fee on the way back in. You know, I need to find a provider to do it, go through their ML KYC. Like, you know, that's a pain. It's a real friction for everyone. But if I can, even if I need a mortgage, I want to be able to, everyone in the world can offer me a mortgage, right? If my collateral is there, my house is sitting as an NFT and people know for sure, you know, you know, that's absolute proof that I own that plot of land. It's worth a certain amount. They're willing to lend us an amount against it. You know, the whole world can provide these financial services, and that's what I think DeFi has shown us. So the world's going to move into a decentralized way. You know, we need fewer and fewer institutions, but by next year, I'm just hoping that we've got, you know, a number of credible products, and the world increasingly is saying that all of this stuff is moving on chain.
All right, so Graham, you're going to final thought this thing for real this time. Tell us what you're seeing for the future here when it comes to being on chain in the traditional finance world.
Yeah, like it's going to take a while. You know, it's taken, you know, Artex has been around 6 years, but you know, whereas in the past maybe we were kind of standing on the beach telling everyone a wave's coming but couldn't see it, everyone sees it now. You know, I think yesterday we had three tokenization projects, not least of which was the Securitize and BlackRock one. So it's here to stay now. So what we say to people is like, look, you know, you don't necessarily have to go, okay, we're going to make money in this one specific area. All you really need to do is believe that the whole of the financial market globally is moving on chain. And if you believe that, then build for it, pick a lane, and you're almost certain to find the money making opportunity there.
Well, there it is right there from Graham Rodford, the CEO of Archax. Graham, I want to thank you so much. Don't go anywhere. Graham Rodford, Archax.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Thank you.